Hello, good afternoon. My name is Cesar Vargas, and I'm the U.S. Chief External Affairs Officer at Anheuser-Busch, America's leading brewer. I have the pleasure of welcoming everyone as we take some time to discuss the critical road safety work happening in the city of Houston, centered around the city's commitment to ending traffic deaths and serious injuries by 2030. It's been a most challenging year for our country and our communities in so many aspects. And it's important that we do not forget the role that each of us can play in helping to build stronger, more vibrant, and more resilient communities, including by improving the safety of the roads that enable us to connect and come together when needed most. At Anheuser-Busch, we have a strong record of supporting the communities we call home, and we have deep roots in the city of Houston. The city is home to one of our flagship breweries, opened back in 1966, as well as one of our craft brewery partners at Karbach Brewing Company, a glass bottle manufacturing facility, and our largest independent distributor partner in the country, Silver Eagle Distributors, that has played a key role in the road safety efforts underway in Houston. We have more than 20,000 employees across the US, with nearly 1,200 who live and work right across Texas. On behalf of all my colleagues, I can tell you that we take great pride in making a positive and lasting impact in our home communities, and that certainly includes the city of Houston. A key part of that commitment includes improving safety in the communities where our employees and their families, our business partners, and our consumers all share the same roads. Everyone deserves to travel to and from work, school, and anywhere else safely without worrying what the next trip might result in a collision or worse. That's why we continue to be a proud supporter of the Houston Safer Streets Initiative as a member of Together for Safer Roads, alongside AT&T, Republic Services, Lyft, and our friends at Silver Eagle Distributors. We are humbled to do our part to help make the thriving city of Houston a safer place for all road users, pedestrians, bus riders, bicyclists, and drivers alike. Since 2019, we've supported critical initiatives through Together for Safer Roads that aim to dramatically reduce fatalities and serious injuries. Through collective action, we are bringing innovation, safety improvements with measurable outcomes, including better sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, protected bike lanes, and safer bus stops in the Gulfton neighborhood, a historically underserved community that is now becoming a model for Vision Zero in Houston and well beyond. Together, we can make a difference in reducing traffic deaths and making our communities safer. It is truly a privilege to be part of this important partnership here in Houston. With that, I'm honored to introduce three individuals who are true leaders in promoting road safety and all of the important related work being done in Houston. Mayor Sylvester Turner, City of Houston Planning Director Margaret Wallace Brown, Transportation Manager David Fields, and President of Together for Safer Roads, David Braunstein, who will engage in a fireside chat discussing Houston's commitment to Vision Zero and all of the great work being done to support this important mission. Thank you so much. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Cesar. We really appreciate your support for our work and for organizations like ours around the world. And finally, thank you to Transportation Alternatives for organizing this great conference again. As Cesar mentioned, I'm David Bronson and the president of Together for Safer Roads. For those of you who don't know us, Together for Safer Roads is what we call a corporate social accelerator. Our organization was formed in 2015 to help bring private sector data, technology, and expertise to the road safety community and to ultimately bend the curve on traffic fatalities. It's my distinct pleasure to be here today and have the chance to talk to Mayor Turner, Mary Wallace Brown, and David Fields about Houston's commitment to Vision Zero. Great to see you again, Mayor Turner and Mary and David. How is everybody doing today?
David, we're doing well, and look, I'm excited to be with you. And I certainly want to thank TSR for everything that's done, and can't say enough for Anheuser-Busch, Silver Eagle. They have just been a tremendous partner for the city over the years. Good to be with you.
That's great. Thanks for joining us today. Mayor Turner, I know you've got a shortened schedule today, and we're glad that you could join us. So let me turn to you with our first question in our virtual fireside chat. We can say this is our inaugural virtual fireside chat together, right?
Yeah, this is the beginning. This is the first.
Just the first, right? We can claim it as our own.
Yes.
So my first question for you is, Houston's been historically known as a car city in some circles, and unfortunately one of the deadliest, right?
Yes.
So I guess the question is, what made you decide that now, of all times, was the right time to declare Houston a Vision Zero city?
In fact, I think the answer is in the question, David, when you say one of the deadliest. Who wants to claim that title? And for a long time, going back even before the 90s, but certainly in the 90s and the early parts of 2000, we were car-centric, and it was all about building roadway capacity. But Houston is also an evolving city, and we are a much different city than we were, let's say, 25 years ago, or 10 years ago, or quite frankly, even 5 years ago. And when I became mayor back in 2016, I announced that we needed to undertake a paradigm shift in our thinking in terms of transportation, transit, and mobility. And we needed to have roads that were going to be safer. So it was not just about relying on a single car or truck to take us from point A to point B, but we needed to focus on multimodal forms of transportation, and we need to focus on safer forms of transportation and change our thinking, not just in terms of construction, but a paradigm shift in our thinking. So we're evolving, and we're moving in a much better direction.
That's great. Thank you for your commitment. Look, we all know, especially the people on this call and the kinds of professionals that join this conference, that this can be very daunting work. And we know that it can be complicated and daunting, but we have to be steadfast in our commitment, and we have to be stubborn optimists in a way, right?
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that work and get into it with us a little bit more?
Yep, and look, and it's not just something that the mayor is driving. So I do want to give a great deal of credit to Margaret Wallace Brown, who is our director of planning. I want to give credit to David Fields, who's working with us specifically on transportation and transit mobility issues. I want to give a lot of credit to TSR, all of our partners, Metro Transit partners. But if you can have wider lanes and cars move faster, and then more people are dying or more people are being seriously injured. So a part of the paradigm shift was to come up, let's say, with Vision Zero. And the whole notion is to try to reduce those fatalities and those serious injuries down to zero by 2030. And even when we were discussing it, the question was, well, Mayor, is that even possible? Well, the question is that if you even have one, you have too many. And then what we saw, what was happening in other cities in the United States and even outside the United States, where there was a substantial, serious decrease in the number of fatalities and serious injuries when people adopted the Vision Zero plan. And so we decided to do the same thing. Even one death is unacceptable. And so the goal should be zero. And then it forces everyone in their thinking, in their planning, in their design to push for that goal. And so for us to achieve that goal by 2030, and we're determined to get there.
That's great. So I think Mayor Turner may have just partially answered this question, but what is it about Vision Zero? The term in some circles, can be scary. It can be intimidating to declare that goal. What is it about that inspires you and makes such a clear call to action it's a big transition in both policy and philosophy for many cities. So can you talk to that from a...
And it is intended to be. It is intended to be big, bold, transformative. Look, when you're seeing 200 fatalities every single year, more than 1,000 serious injuries every single year, those are big numbers. When people, for example, in a wheelchair can't safely cross your streets and being killed, those are serious issues. And quite frankly, our streets, our sidewalks, our modes of transportation should be the safest possible. Anything short of that, we are failing the people who rely on us to design and construct a city that will work for them. And as we talk about multimodal forms of transportation, people are not just driving, they're walking, they're biking, they're using their wheelchairs. And so the infrastructure that we put in place should be the safest as it can be. And we need to have a goal by which to get to zero. And if you don't, then the organization never moves in that direction. So it is transformative, it is bold, but it is achievable. And in this city, we subscribe to the philosophy that if you can dream it, you can achieve it. And so the Vision Zero plan is now drafted, and we're moving forward for its final implementation. We're all aligned. We're working with the various departments and others, our stakeholders, to be in alignment. And I'm excited about it. I think we're all excited about it. The city is excited about it. It's the fourth largest city, and we're all excited.
That's great. You used the word transformational before, and it's a word that shouldn't get used lightly because I think we know that mobility touches so many different areas of the way we work and live and enjoy our cities and suburbs. So can you talk a little bit more, Mayor Turner, about how Vision Zero, you expect Vision Zero to be a transformational platform in other ways as well?
Right. I mean, for the city of Houston, we are not a city that where there was a lot of transit. Okay. There was, in the city of Houston, was one singular mode in sense of transportation. But now for people who are visiting our city, they see that we're building out bike lane infrastructure, high comfort lanes, that's important. It's about changing the thinking so people understand you have to share the road because this is a city that, the car truck was the owner of the road. So it's been that fundamental shift in the thinking where you have to share the road and we have to design and build roads for multiple users. Then we have to expand our sidewalks, for example, to people to use them, whether it's wheelchairs, whether they're people who are walking, you name it. So that's critically important. And then working with, for example, the Metro, the transit entity. And that's including them in everything that in what we do to establish that nexus. Biking, for example, I mean, that was something that in the city of Houston 5 years ago, you just wouldn't see many people doing it. Now, you see a lot of people doing it. You have the mayor going out buying his own bicycle and out there on the weekends or when I leave work, getting on the bicycle, and encouraging people to join me. So it has been a fundamental shift in one's thinking. Now we're not there yet, David. So I don't want anybody to assume that we are at that point. But for people in the city of Houston, we have made and we are making a fundamental shift in our thinking. Okay, and it's important for us to build safe transportation modes so that people feel comfortable in using this network. It's a network that we're building, but it has to be a very safe network.
Great. That's great. You touched on some of the agencies. We know we have Margaret and David here with us. Can you tell us a little more about who you've got around your table. We're proud to be there with you, representing our membership. And I know you're building a very broad coalition. So what agencies and organizations are contributing to your efforts?
Well,
And
I certainly want to acknowledge TSR. I certainly want to thank you all. And I know we've been working with Bridge Synergies, especially in that Gupton area when we talk about sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, protected bike lanes, and the safer bus stops. So I certainly want to acknowledge you all. Planning, of course, and Margaret is with us, the Director of Planning, because they are the ones who are helping to design, map it out, the community engagement, bringing all the stakeholders together, and they've done an exceptional job. Working with her is David Fields, because what we discovered, in the past, we were relying pretty much on public works, but there needed to be a specific point of emphasis within public works where the focus was on helping to design safe streets. That component needed to be in there, and we needed to have someone who was singularly focused in that regard. So David Fields is with us and working with planning as well. Public works is a part of it, because again, when you talk about the change in thinking, that has to be interwoven through all of our departments. Police and fire, because they represent that enforcement end. When we talk about sharing the road, that's important. My communications department, about disseminating the information, that's critical. The metro agency, the transit, that's a part of it. So there are many different components. And then I want to go back to public works again, because it was through public works, for example, that we identified where these fatalities and serious injuries were occurring, because you have to use all of the data analytics to kind of discover, where are your roads and streets that are not safe, and then you work from there.
That's great. I think you may have to depart soon, Mayor, so I want to be respectful of your time.
And David, I'm sorry, I left out one, the mayor's office with people with disabilities.
Yes.
I don't want to leave that agency, that department out, the mayor's office with people with disabilities, because there have been several people who have been either killed or seriously injured in trying to cross the roads in their wheelchairs or walking across, and they've been struck, needing to use our sidewalks, catch a bus, things of that nature. So the mayor's office for people with disabilities has been a very important stakeholder in this entire process.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have any parting words for us about where you see this going in the future? We're all rooting you on. We're here to help. What would you like to tell us about where you're taking this?
Well, what I was saying, then Margaret and David can pick up where I drop off, is that the draft is moving forward in terms of the final plan. I think the goal is to lay that out on November the 7th of this year, 2020. 20 years ago was the last time in the state of Texas where there was not a single fatality on Texas roads and streets. That was 20 years ago. So the goal is to lay this plan out on November 7th, 2020. We are committed. I think it's important. It's not enough to, Houston is 670 square miles, okay? And there are 16,000 miles of streets in the city of Houston. So that's a lot. But it's not enough unless we design and construct roads that are safe. And this plan is intended to do just that. And I will close by simply saying, from my point of view, through our analysis, 6% of the streets account for roughly 60% of those fatalities or serious injuries. And 6% of that number are in low-income communities or communities of color. Okay. Yeah. So it's about equity in building, as we build up this network. It's about making sure that our roads and streets work for everybody, okay? Because many of the individuals in these communities, especially our low-income communities of color, they really rely on transit because they, to get from point A to point B. So we need to make sure that as we finalize and implement the Vision Zero plan, that it works for everybody, regardless of their disabilities, their vulnerabilities, their social economic status. That's important as we move forward. And I would say to you that the city of the future in the city of Houston will look a heck of a lot different than what 25 years ago. And quite frankly, it's my hope it'll look a lot different than what exists today. I believe we're moving in the right direction, but we need to be very intentional, as we move forward. I think I've got the best team around me to do that. And I know that people in this city and even outside will hold us all accountable to achieving our goals. And I'm excited about it.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor, for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. And yeah. I'm a yield to Margaret and to David, and I know they can carry from here.
Okay, super.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. That was fabulous. Just awesome to hear the mayor talk about how this city, this important city to our country and certainly to the local citizens, is rallying to tackle what we know is a very chronic problem sometimes. So let's turn to Mary now, if we can. Mary would just try to get into the tactics a little bit here, right? Maybe you can tell us a little more about how you began creating the Vision Zero Action Plan. The mayor touched on some of those things. Maybe you can go a little bit deeper into how you began creating the plan.
Certainly. I think what I want to start off by saying is before we could do anything, the number one asset we needed for this plan was a visionary mayor. We did this in a year, slightly more than a year, and could not have built the relationships that we've built, could not have done the detailed data analysis, could not have really gotten off the ground without a mayor saying, do this. This was his vision. This is his passion for Houston and Houstonians. And so that was the number one first step we took, was getting him on board. But the other thing we looked at, we looked around the nation as to who's doing this and what are some of the best practices. Houston's really good at learning from other people's mistakes. And so how do we, dig into this? And we looked at context, needs, priorities, clearly defined the problem. Defining the problem with data helps us determine priorities and establish milestones. And when I talk about data, I mean more than just quantitative. We looked at qualitative as well, like dangerous streets and intersections, but also traffic volumes and people's perceptions and how people felt safe on our communities or how they didn't feel safe in our streets. And so we looked at a variety of things. And as he said, it took us to, I think, some really surprising information into this. As we started to reveal what the high injury network looked like, I don't think any of us really expected to see what we found.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about what the data for Houston suggests and where you have started in a city of, as the mayor said, I think it's 670 square miles.
It is 670 square miles. It's a big place. And looking at the data, we discovered, maybe the first surprising thing is that 1/3 of traffic deaths involve pedestrians, even though pedestrians are only about 2% of our residents who walk to work. We were killing pedestrians at a much higher rate than we have pedestrians. As the mayor said, 60% of our crashes occur in only 6% of our streets. And of that 60%, 62% of those streets are actually in minority and communities of color. That was eye-opening to us. We are putting the most vulnerable people in Houston at risk every day. And we are committed to building, as he said, a multimodal city, but you can only build so much if you're continuing to put people in harm's way. And so how do you build a system that simply provides safe passage? That the network may be in place, but if it's not a safe network, then it really isn't the network that you need.
Right. Okay. Anything else about the specific insights that you've picked up from the data? They're actually, as we're doing this, Marianne, I'm scanning the Q&A, and there seems to be a lot of interest in understanding speeding, and I know we didn't talk about this specifically in the preparation, but could you talk a little more about that, maybe?
Houstonians drive quickly. We drive fast. We've built a network of roads that encourage that. As the mayor said, spent many years, many decades trying to increase capacity and trying to worry that people weren't getting to where they needed to be quickly enough. And that has evolved into what we have right now, which is a city that people drive too fast in. So how do we get people to where they need to be in time and quickly enough, but yet safely? That's really the question that David and his team, who have been actually drafting the plan, have been focusing on. In Texas, it's hard to change speed limits. We are hoping in Austin this coming session, we might be able to get some traction on that. Maybe reduce the speed limits across the city, reduce the speed limits in some areas. Slower traffic kills fewer people. We know that. That's a fact. And so how do we turn this network into something that, again, gets you where you need to be, but in a safe and in a safe manner?
Right. To summarize, you've said that legislative action is going to be necessary, it seems like, to tackle the speeding issues in a systematic way, right?
Yeah, in the state of Texas, we are about where we can be for speed limits in Houston. And so what we're looking for is how do we get to the legislature to help them, to have them help determine that we can lower our speeds.
Right. Yeah, are speed cameras allowed, Margaret? That's
No.
some of the questions coming in as well.
Red light cameras are not allowed either.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So that's good. So we're going to continue along here with some of our prepared questions. We'll come back to the other questions from the audience. They're coming in fast and furious, and we'll do our best to get to some of those for sure. So, thinking back to the conversation about analysis and analytics, and we know that you've also already begun to look at additional proxies for crashes and understanding where crashes might occur. Our work with you in particular helped you to look at near misses in the Gulfton neighborhood. And by the way, we should thank many of the people in Houston, especially in the academic community at the Kinder Institute, for laying the groundwork for the work that we did, because they did some very important work around near misses in the Gulfton community. And then we worked on that together after that to use some technology to understand near misses in a finer grained way. Why would you say you want to explore these new measures early on in the Vision Zero initiative? What benefits might you see from doing that early on?
I'm going to defer this question to David, because he's been really on the ground and planning our Vision Zero efforts and working with our partners. And I think part of the answer is the earlier we can learn this data, the more time we have to right to the ship and to invoke the necessary changes and educate our community and work on all the steps that it takes to solve the problems. But specifically about the Gulfton community, David's been on the ground there and has some real insight in what we accomplished and how we're working with the community on that.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah. So to start, all the data that we've been talking about today, that is crash data that has been reported and entered into the system. And it tells us, somebody came out and filed that, and that is, quantitative data. But what that doesn't tell us is all the places where either somebody was uncomfortable filing a report for a lot of different reasons, where there was no actual crash, but there was a near miss. So what would you actually file into a report? And that is so much of the proactive work of planning that we really need to get out in front of. So the work that we did with TSR and Brisk Synergies to start recording at intersections that we knew things were happening and start to identify what was happening that wasn't getting written down. And then we can start to get ahead of this to start to say, okay, if we don't do something soon, we actually will have a crash report, but we can get ahead of this and stop that from happening in advance. That's really, really useful and a great approach. We've taken that a step further for the Vision Zero work, where we have reached out all across across the city and asked people to tell us, where do these things happen? It's a huge place. We're not going to put a camera everywhere for this kind of pilot project, but help us. You know your community so well. Where do you not cross the street anymore because it feels unsafe? Where did you almost have a crash that we should know about? And so we are pairing the crash data, the quantitative, with the community input, the qualitative. And with that, we're really able to focus on what we need to do.
That's great. That's great. It's a continuous improvement project, right? I mean, I think you're well positioned to use data in new and in some fundamental ways to do that. So, David, can you tell us a little more about the action plan itself and when it will be released and what you're focused on in the early phases of it?
Sure. So as the mayor said, we are aiming for November 7th, which is the 20th anniversary of the last time there was no fatality on Texas's streets, Texas roads. And we feel like this is such a huge component that we can play at the city and say, look, we see our plan of action. This is our to-do list to make this better. So the timing is just very monumental. It's very emotional for us. We feel like it is a long time coming and we really want to do this piece and make things better for our community. The plan lays out in 14 approaches, 3 or 4 actions in each approach about what we're going to do. So it totals up to 50 actions. And what we've learned is there is so much we could do. We would love to on day 1 do all 50, but just like any place, we have to prioritize. So we have identified 12 of those actions that are kind of the bedrock, the foundational actions that if we don't do these and don't get these going, the rest are just not going to be nearly as effective. So what we think of as November 7th as the release date, that's day 0. And from there on forward, we kick in with our 12 priority actions and all 50.
Great. And David, what are some of the highest priority actions? Can you drill down on that a little bit? And I think the second question as a follow-up is a little bit more nuanced, but how do you decide what actions are dependent on other actions over time? I think we spoke a little bit about speed enforcement, the challenges in at a state level and then the municipality level, but there's clearly dependencies involved in all this work. So can you take us through your high priority actions and then talk a little more about the dependencies that you're trying to tackle?
Sure. So some of them have already come up. You've heard many people already comment on them. Managed speed is certainly towards the top of the list because as Margaret said, speed is the primary factor that differentiates a crash between an injury and a fatality. We know we need to get this under control. At the same time, not all the tools that might be available in other places are available to us because of the state control of certain speed limits and things like that. So while those are in the plan, we're not relying on them. There's a lot that we can do in design, in communication, in working with the communities. We're really trying hard to talk to communities about our full toolbox of speed management. So very often we'll hear somebody say, we want this solution on this street. And what we'd rather talk to them about is, look, we have a full toolbox. Let's figure out the right one. You might not even know about something that could help. And if we end up at the one you started at, great. But there might be more that we can do for you and let us help in that vein. I think the other one that, that frequently gets lost is literally the building blocks of how we do planning here. So right now, like in many cities, we use something called vehicle level of service, how many cars can get through one traffic signal on one signal cycle. And in the plan, it says we're going to change that to multimodal level of service. We need to start saying, as we're designing, as we're planning, as we're working with our development community, with our host communities, with our neighborhoods, this is going to be part of the decision making. And that is, in the long term, really going to start the transformation.
That's great. So we have a lot of questions that have come in through the Q&A. I think that concludes the portion of the prepared questions. I'm going to just start going through these, and I'm going to try to tie them to the conversation as well. So we have a question about vehicle miles traveled. And I think, David, you may have just touched on this, right? Is Houston planning to commit to a key component of your measures, reducing vehicle miles traveled? And as a follow-up to that, redesigning streets where, it may be less easy for cars to get around?
So I'll start, and Margaret, if you want to
jump in.
Okay. So first on vehicle miles traveled, it's really useful to remember the context of Houston. We are talking about 670 square miles. It's a very, very big place. And we know there are a lot of people who will continue to make very long trips. What is also very interesting is that because we don't have traditional zoning, we also don't have those separation of land uses that really start to add vehicle miles on every trip you make. So in a place where you are separated, where single family residential is in one area and all the commercial is somewhere else, you really don't have all that many choices beyond driving when you get past a certain distance. We don't have that here. We have never forcibly separated all these places. So I live around the corner from one of my favorite restaurants, and down the block is a great grocery store and 2 drugstores and several banks. But I can walk to all of those things because we didn't say you couldn't build it that way. So what we think, instead of the vehicle miles traveled, there are other pieces that might be a little more effective in the short run, like multimodal level of service, so that we are actually building in those components and letting every mode really be part of the street network.
And I want to amplify that just a little bit by also saying that we do have a relatively low density in Houston. And so one of the things that we are trying to do with some of our development codes is look at how we can increase density, how we can, Houston is considered being a very inexpensive network when it comes, inexpensive community when it comes to housing. The challenge is that in the inner core, it's very expensive, and it only gets less expensive as you move out to the outer suburbs of our area. And that's possibly common in a lot of America. And so how do we bring that less expensive housing? How do I, the levers that I can move, what can I do with our development code that can bring and encourage the development of less expensive housing inside Houston? And I'm not talking about, tax credit affordable housing. I'm talking about how can we increase the people who live in Houston. In the years between 2010 and 2018, we increased the number of housing units by 26% inside the Loop 610, which is kind of our inner ring. But at the same time, we only increased the population by 10%. And it was really clear to us that singles, millennials, whoever they are now renting 2-bedroom apartments instead of a 1-bedroom apartment. So people are spreading out. That's a challenge for us in that we're all individually taking up more space. And how do we encourage the development of a little bit more dense community, of smaller units, of smaller housing development, infill development, so that we can provide the type of housing that people want inside the city, but also increase density so that you can be closer to where you need to drive. So you can be in a neighborhood where David lives that says that I can walk to the restaurant or walk to the bank. We're looking at all of those. This is a kind of a new day in Houston for all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you're connecting all those dots too. Speaking of that, we have a question from the audience about what mechanisms you all are using to collect community related data, the qualitative data that you're using to inform your Vision Zero strategy and tactics.
All kinds. David, in fact, David's been called in from the field this afternoon. His Vision Zero team is out at one of our transit centers taking surveys this afternoon. Luckily, the weather is just beautiful today. But we're using face-to-face. We're using, we have a Let's Talk Houston app now in which we collect data. It's a survey document on our website that we can ask you a question, you can respond. We're continuing to do community meetings through virtual meetings and all types of things like that. David, what did I miss? What would you add to that?
Well, we were honestly stumbling a little bit at the beginning of COVID, right? When we were going to be doing a huge public outreach campaign for Vision Zero. The timing made it very difficult. So we took stock of what we could do. Lauren Grove, the project manager for Vision Zero, is very passionate about this. She designed a 4-hour virtual open house, which was a series of 1-hour kind of repeat sessions with different videos on similar topics interspersed in different interviews in each of those 4 hours. And it went from, I think it was 4 in the afternoon till 8 at night, so that just about any time somebody could call in, they would have time just to talk about their issues. We had availability so technical staff could break away into a room and just talk to them if they had issues that weren't being dealt with by the big presentation. We had a few hundred people between those sessions, and it was great. Unfortunately, we also know that just online and virtual doesn't touch everybody, doesn't connect with everybody. That's why the team is out at the transit center right now, socially distanced with masks and gloves, but with printed out boards 6 feet apart from each other, walking people through as they transfer between our bus lines to say, can you spend 30 seconds with us on each of these boards? And can you give us feedback because the plan's coming out really soon?
Right. It sounds like it's gotten harder to get that community feedback though, for sure.
It is. We just take that as our mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gotten harder to get genuine, authentic community input. I think I think you could say you can do community engagement through virtual easily, but you really can't. Authenticity, accurate, really committed network input and engagement requires being with people. That's what planners know. It's how planners operate. We like being with people and we like talking to people.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience that relates to zoning again. Margaret, you were touching on that earlier. And the question is, so we know that Houston's one of the largest cities by area in the nation. What are some of the carrots that the city can use to encourage development that is friendly to pedestrians and cyclists as you look at making those comprehensive zoning ordinances, putting those in place? What are the carrots that you could use in the interim, I suppose?
So we are a city that kind of operates by carrots. We are the largest city in America without a zoning code, and the second largest city in America is a very small city just immediately south of us called Pasadena, Texas. So, I mean, we get that we're different than virtually every other city in America. We have a development code that encourages. We have just let me say something different. We have just passed changes to our development code that encourage a more safe pedestrian, an enhanced pedestrian realm. And it used to be that we made it difficult for you to do the right thing for pedestrians. We required you to put your building further 25 feet from a major thoroughfare. We were, which then resulted in you putting your parking lot in front, which made the pedestrian automobile intersections frequent and unsafe. And so earlier this year, we passed changes to our ordinance that discourage that. Especially, we're focusing primarily now on transit corridors and around transit stations, where we are encouraging people to do the right thing and to separate the pedestrians from the auto oriented uses and providing a buffer zone as a wider sidewalk and a more interesting walking place. And so that's the first step that we've made. But we're looking at, as we talk about density, as we look at ways to bring more people inside the city and make more heat, and you know, we're looking at, do we need to require the number of parking spaces that we do for accessory dwelling units? Do we, you know, have we right-sized our parking requirements? We have a lot of parking lots in this town. They are not adding value to the property owners. They're not adding value for the city of Houston. They're not adding value. So are they needed? Or how can we right-size that? Not that we need to get rid of parking regulations, but how can we right-size the ones that we have for the context? We've been a city for 30 years who's been primarily a one-size-fits-all city. And over the past year, we've really turned to that also. And we're looking at context more so. And so how do we right-size all of these rules for the context is the question we deal with every day.
Yeah. Margaret, speaking of context, you know, we're all living through coronavirus, and I wonder if you could talk to the context and how it's changed and how it's actually creating opportunities now. How's the nature of the city changed since coronavirus and the movement of individuals in the city? Are there opportunities that you're seeing now because of that? Do you need less parking perhaps? Could you make that argument easier now than before, for example? Maybe that's something you could talk a little more about.
Yeah, David talks about the fact that, and he's relatively new to Houston, but he gets us. He got us in his first couple of weeks. He talks about the fact that we've been saying for decades that we'll never get rid of traffic, but look what we did in March. We got rid of traffic. So how can we maximize that? We have taken steps to the More Space program, which is allowing restaurants to expand their serving spaces out into their parking lots because they aren't using the parking spaces right now. And so, you know, letting them do that. We are also a city that has embraced, now I can't remember, maybe 10 years ago, the electorate chose to issue bonds for a massive bio greenways effort, $124 million worth of bonds, and we matched that with private contributions. So in the past 10 years, we have turned a city that has a lot of bayous running through it into one that has amazing greenway and green spaces. And so last spring and now starting now that the weather is cooler, we see people on our bios daily, every day, walking to work, riding bikes to work, using that network that we've built over the past several years, and really taking advantage of the great outdoors spaces that we have really built in Houston. David may want to add something to that. I'm sure I've missed something.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is kind of part of that long-term work. People are surprised how much has gone into our bike network already. We are already at about 500 miles of high comfort bike facilities, and we're aiming for 1,500 miles. And these are what other cities say, no, you've added a zero on the end of there, right? You're at 50 miles. We did 50 miles this past year. We are not the Houston that people think.
That is a very true statement.
That's great to hear. Have you all been? You know, I've read about street closures and new uses of the public space and whatnot. Have you looked at doing that and then turning that into permanent changes as well? Do you see that as an opportunity for Houston coming out of sort of building back better in that way?
So we are looking at one of the primary streets downtown that is actually not a connected street. It's Main Street, where our light rail goes and has a lot of restaurants and bars, a few residential buildings. We are working with that community right now to figure out, is there a way where they can set up shop in the street itself? It is not an easy project. It is brand new to Houston. We've never done it before. There's a train running through the middle of it. So there are all sorts of issues that we want, but we have a very interested stakeholder group, including the residential buildings. They have said, yes, we'd like to see more activity on our street. So we're going to see what we can do, see we pilot it. And if that can get up and running, then we can take that lesson elsewhere.
Right. And maybe we could finish up here. We've talked about a lot of stakeholder groups. We've gotten some questions from the audience about how Houston is engaging the families of those who've been injured and families who unfortunately lost loved ones on the streets. Maybe we could close with you all talking about how those families are part of your movement and how you can get to solving this problem in Houston.
Certainly, we know that the lived experience is a data set that's just not incorporated nearly enough, and we are trying our best to say not just what do the stats show and what do the speed records show, but what has this changed in your life? Or if we had done this differently, what could we have done differently to make that change? So we spend a lot of time out in the field, now socially distanced, but with these communities, so they can point and we can see it, because what you see from an aerial or you see online is just not as moving or as cluing in on what you really need to learn about the street and about the neighborhood. So we try every chance we get when we hear about something to go out to that community and have them tell us the story from within. One of the ways we're reflecting that in the Vision Zero plan is it's building trust is that overall approach, and that action under that is to make it easier for community members to be part of our Vision Zero committees and directing groups, because if we're going to work with them and if they're going to hold us accountable, we need to make it easy for them to be part of this process.
Great. We have 5 minutes left now. I got a technical question for you. What is your definition of a high comfort bikeway, David? Is it the same thing as a protected bike lane?
It is not exactly. So certainly anything protected on street is, but as Margaret said, we have a large system of greenways and bayous that are off street. So there is no vehicle conflict, but those are high comfort as well. So our terms are a little bit unique to Houston, but if you look at our whole network and everywhere you can get, it is more than just what you can do on street.
Okay, great. I'm going to just do one more quick scan. I think we've tried our best to cover a lot of the questions. There was some overlap between them, but just scanning the chat again one last time here. I hope we've covered it. I, for one, have really appreciated the time we've gotten together. Thrilled to be a part of your journey at TSR. I know that the audience is rooting for you. I can tell just by the level of enthusiasm and the questions and the details in the questions that everybody wants this to succeed for Houston. So I will close with that as my final remarks. Would you like to close on your end, and then we'll adjourn?
I'll just offer that if anybody wants to come see Houston and have either David or I show them our high comfort bike lanes, we're available.
David, any last words from you?
I think that says it. Come join us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I learned an awful lot, and I've been spending quite some time with Houston in these last 2 years. And I continue to learn from our experiences there. But thank you so much to David and Margaret, and please pass on our thanks to the mayor again. And last but not least, thank you to Anheuser-Busch for being a great partner to us, and certainly to Transportation Alternatives and all of the people that are part of the great family that is around this country and around the world that's trying to help make our world's roads safer for everybody. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.